For those who aren't aware of Causeway, I'm aware we have quite a few people who aren't members here today. We're a business networking organisation with a primary focus to protect and enhance the trading relationships between Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, no matter what the political or economic landscape is. It's about providing an informal business platform for people to meet, chat, collaborate and communicate with each other. Our events usually attract people from across Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, as well as our dual partners at the British and Irish Trading Alliance, and our events and see what we're all about. What's the key to our success? Well, we only launched 4 years ago, but we've really grown in that time, and I think it's all about the people that make the network as successful as it is. So I'd encourage you, if you can, to just spread the word about Causeway to anyone who you think might be interested in who we are, what we do, and our events. They're more than welcome to come along. We're a very friendly, welcoming organisation. I will now pass over to Causeway Director Judith O'Leary. She's also MD of Multi-Service Communications Agency represent here in Edinburgh. Over to you, Judith.
Thank you very much, Aoife. Can you unmute me? Because it's not allowing me to do it. Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up, excellent. I'm absolutely delighted to chair this session today with Miranda. Miranda I've known for quite a while, and she never ceases to amaze me in what she can reveal about the mind and about how we react to certain circumstances. I think as a manager, most of you will have been through a pretty tumultuous time recently in terms of managing staff during this pandemic, and nobody really had any training for this. So we're trying to catch up and try to understand how our staff are dealing with this, but also how we are dealing with it as individuals. And sometimes it's half the battle is to understand how we're feeling, to recognise it and to have strategies in place to deal with it, both for ourselves and for our team. And this is very much Miranda's expertise. So Miranda has worked in mental health for over 20 years and recently focused on as a hypnotherapist, and she's looking at how the mind works, why it reacts in the way it reacts, and how we can train our mind to be more efficient and more effective in our daily lives. And that's why we felt Miranda would be a really great speaker to have along today. So I'm going to introduce you to Miranda Robarts-Arnold, who will take you through a presentation, and there will be a session at the end for Q&A. So please do use the chat room on the side and let us know anything that you really want Miranda to focus on during this session. Thanks very much. Over to you, Miranda.
Unmuted. Brilliant. Thank you all so much for coming. So I'm a bit of an infiltrator because I'm actually based in the far southwest of England in Somerset. I can actually see Glastonbury out of my window. So how does someone based in England come to be speaking to you in Scotland? Well, one of my hats is as a clinical hypnotherapist trained in solution-focused brief therapy, which some of you may have encountered in your managerial roles through coaches and trainers. But my other hat is working with my mum. We run a business, the Montessori Partnership, where we train adults to become Montessori practitioners and head offices in Edinburgh. So my mum and I work remotely, and Judith promotes us through Represent. So that's how I'm here. So my presentation today is going to be in 3 parts. The first part is going to be a bit of a lecture. Aoife is going to run polls and I'm going to ask you to comment in the chat box. And in this part of the presentation, I'm going to give you an explanation of how the brain works, how anxiety, depression, anger, and associated negative behaviours and symptoms happen, and how you might spot them in yourself or in a staff member. I'm going to explain the importance of serotonin and dopamine in your brain and how they help people to cope and be motivated and do all the positive behaviours that we really want to see in staff and in colleagues and also in ourselves. And I will explain how the brain deals with daily stress, what happens when your system's overloaded, and I'll explain about the importance of good sleep and how to improve that. in part 2, I'm going to give you 3 case studies, and I thought that your time would be very well spent if I present them to you, and then I get you all to talk about how you might cope with them, and then I can pitch in with some advice or some strategies, because I don't manage staff in my business. I manage me and I manage my mum, and we manage to do Zoom meetings, and that's really good. But you're going to have much more complex issues to deal with. So I thought that there's going to be people much more expert in that area. So I thought your time would be very well spent with you discussing my created issues. And then in part 3, I'm going to give you some helpful solution focused questions that you can ask your returning staff if they're struggling, to keep things light and optimistic and hopefully get them out of their rut. So today we're mainly going to be focusing on people returning to work who aren't okay. People who may be exhibiting behaviours that are not helpful in the workplace, people who are being difficult to deal with. And so what I'd like for Aoife to do now is to run poll 1. So in order to offer up usable ideas, I need to explain to you where these, I better submit this poll too, where these problems are coming from. And they actually all originate in your brain. Your brain is what organises you to be able to do everything that you do, consciously, unconsciously. You do things sometimes that you don't want to do and you don't know why they're doing them. That's your brain as well. So I'm aiming this information, I suppose, I'm assuming that most of you are business owners or leaders. So I'm kind of tailoring it towards that sort of angle. Your working lives have changed a lot. And I see from the polls here that 45% are employers, 23% employees, and 32% others. So mainly kind of a third employers, really. But what I say is going to be relevant to everybody. But working lives have changed. Your lives will have changed. You will be noticing things in yourself, some positive things, some negative things. You're having to be really flexible personally and in a business sort of setting, in the face of the fact that no one really knows what's going on. In the face of the fact that also there is emerging a distrust of the information that we're being told. So that adds another level of mental complexity on what we have to deal with and how we make sense of things. On the plus side, if you are an employer with a workplace, there are rules and everybody is having to stick by what the rules are at the moment. And I guess they're getting updated as more information comes in. But in that sense, there's kind of a level playing field for people, and they are the official rules. So if you're having people who are being tricky, you can always fall back on the fact that these are the rules, this is what we are doing, and I'm sorry if this is difficult for you, but you're just going to have to suck it up a bit. That's the, you do have that fallback for you. Some people or yourselves, you might be finding that you've got lonely during lockdown. You might be missing the kind of office bounce that you have when you go to the workplace, and that creative energy that comes from being around people who are good at what they do and people who are really enthusiastic about what they do. And you may notice that people who've been really enthusiastic and committed suddenly are less so, that this has all been very difficult. So what I'd like to do to start off in a really positive way is to ask people to use the chat to just write down one thing that they're pleased about that's happened to them during lockdown. No matter how big or how small, it might be something that you felt you've coped with really well and you're surprised about, or maybe like my mum, you are smashing through the Gaelic course every day. I'm always amazed by this level of commitment to learning new things. So if you could just write something in the chats, we've got learnt to bake, spending more time with family, and it has offered people a different opportunity to learn how to do new things. But I'd also like you to write down in the chat box if there's anything specifically that you'd like to know from this presentation. If you've got a specific question, and as I go along I'll try and weave them in and answer them for you. So I'll say my positive thing for lockdown. Being a self-employed person, I spend most of my days in old life, I would spend by myself at home. And I'm quite a solitary person anyway, so it really, really made me quite a hermit. And what I've realised from my husband being at home is that I like having another person around all the time. So my commitment is that I'm going to be less of a hermit and really seek out being more sociable and being with people the more that we're allowed to do that. So in order to set a context, I'm going to share my screen with you now and show you. Can you see my screen? Maybe not. Share screen. There we go. Okay, so here is a picture of your brain, and in order to set this context, I need to explain that the brain has two main areas. It has this top bit here, which is called the neocortex, and that has been around in humans for 2 to 3 million years. It's our consciousness, and we have this very deep inside of us part of our brain, which in hypnotherapy terms we call the primitive brain. It's the limbic system, and that has been in mammals for 150 million years or thereabouts. So it's really, 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 really ancient. And if you think of it, it's kind of our hardwiring. And it's your fight, flight, depression, anxiety part of your brain. So let me explain about the positive bit. So this area here, which you can think of as above your left eyebrow, it's called your left prefrontal cortex. And that is the part of your brain that is like the boss or the CEO of a company. It can set long-range goals. It can see the future going well. It's solution-focused. It's clever. And it doesn't get fazed by things. And it's extremely rational. So that's where your great business ideas come from. You go, I've got this great idea. I could totally do this. How do we do it? And you get on with it. That's the really smart part of us. And it's attached to this neocortex, which as a hypnotherapist we call the intellectual mind, and that's the bit that we don't share with animals. That's our 2 to 3 million years ago evolutionary leap. It's what took us from being apes into being human people, and that's where our intellect comes from, our creativity, our ability to do art and music and bake cakes and do PR and design a garden, be a farmer, all of those amazing things that we're able to do as humans when we're operating at our best, that comes from the intellectual mind. It's when humans started being able to imagine things and tell stories and communicate well. So when we're in this part of the brain, we cope really well. We play well with others in this part of the brain. It's where you get your sense of humor, and it makes you reliable and conscientious and committed, and you turn up and you bring something to the table all the time in this part of the brain. And that's where you want your staff to be. That's where you want to be when you're at work too, because when you're thinking in that part of the brain, things aren't a massive stress. They can be challenging, but they're not massively difficult to overcome. So we want to be thinking in this part of the brain and getting the real strong positivity and motivation that comes from thinking in that part of the brain. So my next slide, I'm going to explain about the two main neurotransmitters that make you feel happy, coping person, serotonin and dopamine. So when you're thinking in your intellectual mind, when things are going well for you, you produce serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that tells you that your personal cliff edge is a really, really long way away. It means that things can come up on the horizon that are difficult and challenging and stressful and horrible, but you can cope with them. You don't crumple into a heap. You can manage, you can get through it. If you're producing serotonin in your brain, you have a general feeling of well-being and contentment, and you feel that life's generally kind of going okay and you're positive. If you have any personal experience of difficulties with mental health, and you may have been to see your GP about feeling depressed or low, they will prescribe you something that keeps the serotonin that you produce in your brain already coping. So you may have heard of of how antidepressants might work. They act on your own serotonin. So that's the importance of serotonin in mental well-being. But it's also, being good at your job. You have to have some serotonin to do that. The second important neurotransmitter chemical is dopamine. And dopamine is a motivator chemical. It's the feeling of being chuffed when you've done something. So when I leave here today to my other room in the house, I'm hoping I'm going to get a really big flood of dopamine and go, oh yeah, that was really good. Oh, I'm quite good. Oh, do you know what? I could probably do another presentation to 30 strangers. Again, that's fine. Great. It makes you be able to do things again and repeat things. So in terms of having a motivated workforce, employees, or yourself, this is an important chemical, because if you don't have it, you are unmotivated and you feel flat and you feel bored. So this presentation is going to hopefully show you ways in which you can raise your own serotonin and dopamine and that of your colleagues and your family and your teenagers and anybody else who happens to be needing a bit of a boost. So what I'd like to do now is to get Aoife to do poll 2. And I'll stop sharing now. So we're not too concerned about people who are thinking in their intellectual minds. They're not our problem focus for today, although they do need some care. So I will come back to what you can do to support the people who have been holding everything together during lockdown. The people that we want to identify are the people who are returning and are not showing those traits of being motivated, coping. They might have, well, leads me to my next bit. Can you write in the chat about what negative traits you think you might be encountering from your trickier staff on returning to your workplace? So if you could just type in a few things, and if nobody types, then I will list some. There wasn't an option to say, oh, I'm not planning to return to the office soon. And I'm really pleased to see that in the poll that nobody's overwhelmed with anxiety. So well done, folks. And most people are okay generally. And that's what I would kind of expect. Most people who have the inclination to attend a networking event are probably people who are feeling quite motivated and looking for a bit of positive inspiration from peers. So that's great. So I'm going to go back to reluctance. Here we go. Right. Dreading meeting staff on furlough. Reluctance. Challenging rules. Yeah. Worried about the health risks. Anxious about public transport. So a lot of it is to do with worrying about health, I think, by the looks of it. So thanks for doing that. I'm going to share my screen again and take you back to our picture of the brain. So back on our picture of the brain, I want to explain about the problem bit, the bit that's causing anxieties about health, worrying about, public transport, worrying about seeing people back off furlough. I want to talk about this primitive part of the brain. So this is your really ancient bit. This has been evolving in us mammals for 150 million years. And if you think about the fact that your average lifespan for a British human is what, 80 years or so, that's a really, really long time. Thousands and thousands and thousands of generations of us being human have led us to this point, and this point is ancient. And it's your fight, flight, depression, anxiety, anger part of your brain. And it is there to step in to help you if it senses that you're in danger, a real danger or an imagined danger, a perception of danger, or an invisible danger, like COVID. We can't see COVID, but it's there. So this has set off the primitive brains of lots and lots of people, and it's making people anxious. So if you think that this intellectual part of your mind is the boss, then your primitive brain is your guard. It's your health and safety officer. It's the mental part of you that's walking around with a great big clipboard and a high-vis jacket going, no, do not walk in front of that car. Don't do that. No, dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. Is it dangerous over there? Let's not go over there. Let's not go back to work because that's really dangerous. We've been told we have to stay in because it's dangerous. So we don't want to go back. No, we're not doing it. So there's some tricky biology to overcome here, given what we've all been told is that outside is dangerous and we shouldn't be going out there. So it doesn't surprise me that there are people who are feeling that they're just taking tentative steps to re-emerge into the world. So negative workplace behaviours you might notice if your staff are in this primitive brain are, I don't know, things like procrastination, being sloppy. An interesting one, presenteeism, where somebody shows up in body, but they're really not there in spirit at all. Their mind is elsewhere. They might be low motivation, frustration, kind of not getting on with others, maybe missing deadlines, maybe just not turning up to a Zoom meeting, just not being available. That's, that could be a symptom. So when a person is thinking in this primitive part of their brain, they're not producing serotonin and they're not producing dopamine, going back to those two neurotransmitters. They're producing stress hormones called adrenaline and cortisol. And adrenaline's produced so that you can be fast, so that you can get out of danger really, really quickly. And you might have felt adrenaline. It's nerves, it's butterflies in your stomach. And to some extent, I was saying to Eva at the beginning that I was a little bit nervous about doing this because most of you are strangers to me. But adrenaline makes you sharper. It makes you it makes you faster and it makes you think a little quicker to a certain extent if you're already feeling positive. And that's also, excitement is there too. But adrenaline, when you're scared, it's that visceral feeling of if you have a near miss in your car and you go, oh, and you're flooded with the most horrible feeling, but you were quick enough to put your brakes on. The second stress hormone that you produce is cortisol, and cortisol is produced to enable you to deal with prolonged periods of stress. So this might well be affecting people now because this whole COVID thing's been really stressful, and for people who are trying to navigate their way through changing their business model, dealing with other people, dealing with financial things, they may well be having quite a lot of cortisol flooding through their system. And just as an interesting fun fact, I've been seeing on Facebook quite a lot of instances of corona belly where we all sit on the sofa getting fat and getting fat around the middle. It's really interesting because your receptors for your cortisol reside in your tummy fat, basically. So the fatter you get, the more cortisol receptors you have, which means your capacity for becoming stressed is greater. So it's something to think about, because we are all one unit of ourselves and everything affects everything else. So let's imagine that you're in your intellectual mind right now and you're interested in what I'm talking about. So you're going to be up here and your brain's going to be making all sorts of connections of things. And when you leave our Zoom meeting to go to another room in your house, let's suppose that something really scary happens to you. Suppose out from your hall cupboard jumps a big massive polar bear or a dude with a machete or something really frightening that's really unexpected. What do? Well, basically, you run off as fast as your little legs will carry you, or you run off somewhere and hide, or you punch the person or polar bear in the face, and then you probably run off. You move from your intellectual mind, which would be going, hang on a minute, why is there a polar bear in my hall cupboard? This doesn't make any sense. This is stupid. Maybe the polar bear's not even hungry, so blah, blah, blah. But by that point, you've been eaten. So your intellect is slower than your primitive safety response, but the two things work in tandem, if you like. And if things are going well, your intellect will be at the forefront, and your primitive safety mechanism kind of lurks in the background, ready to step in if it thinks that you're in danger. But the problem is when the primitive brain is doing most of your operating in life. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to explain about a unique set of symptoms that your primitive brain gives you. So here is my polar bear. Here is you. Now, when I was making this slide, I realized that this is a man going to work, and here is a woman with some children, and this person is totally white. I couldn't find a scared person of other colour, and I couldn't find a man with a baby, and I couldn't find a woman going to work. So I apologise for the inherent sexism and racism of this slide. So just want to qualify that. Anyway, so here is your polar bear, and here is you. When you were running away from your polar bear, what happened to you physically is an amazing set of responses that have evolved to get you out of the way of the problem. So your heartbeat will be going faster to pump all of the blood needed around your body so that you can run off or fight it or hide, but to make you quick at doing whatever of those responses comes most naturally to you. You'll be sweating to cool yourself down if you're running off. Your breathing will get quicker to try and get more oxygen into your body to make you more efficient at running away. You might throw up or feel sick. The biological reason for that is because it's not efficient for you to survive if you are digesting nicely the dinner that you last ate. If you can upchuck it and run off, you're going to live to see another day more quickly. Similarly, you might lose the contents of your bowels, literally pooing your pants. And we all know that means that you're scared, doesn't it, when you poo your pants? So that's what might happen. So all of these physical responses that you have to something scary are really great for getting you away from this chap here. But because we're modern, we have now worries about our housing situation. Can you afford to pay the mortgage? You have the problem of, you know, who's going to look after the children? When are the schools opening? What if the children get COVID and, you know, give it to granny? All those home related things. There's the actual virus itself, which is invisible. So that's a really difficult thing for the brain to manage to cope with. We've got, worries about money. So you'll notice that I've got pounds and euros to make it equal for the British and Irish people. And you're worrying about your own health. You might also be worrying about the fact that you're not coping with this very well and you're feeling weird. That's a possibility. You might have found that you've started drinking more. Wine o'clock might be coming earlier and earlier in the day for some people. You might be concerned about that. That's also going to set off this fight or flight response. So we are responding, your stressed person is responding to modern concerns in the same way that they respond to if a polar bear jumps out at you and tries to eat you. It's complex, but it's solvable. So I'd like poll 3, please, now, Aoife. So an important thing to think about is the fact that the workplace itself has become a place of danger to some people, in some people's minds. 2 meters, is it 2 meters or should it be 1 meter? How is it going to work if COVID's at work? What PPE do you have? What do you have to put in? So the idea of actually returning to work in a professional capacity to a workplace, and somebody mentioned traveling on public transport, getting to work becomes a danger in and of itself. So that's a huge thing for the primitive brain to be working on, and it's rightly scared, but that scaredness is being reinforced because we are in an actual pandemic. It's real. So it feeds into this scared part that doesn't like it and really probably wants to stay at home. So what I'd like to show next is to go back to my picture of the brain to explain how the polar bear system gets set off. So deep inside your head, you have 2 very important parts of the primitive brain. And the first one is your amygdala, and that's the little red blob in the middle, and that's about the size of a pea or the top of your thumb. And it's the part of your brain that looks out for what's not right all the time. It's always looking out for things that are dangerous, things that are not to be dealt with. It's that person with the high-vis jacket and the clipboard going dangerous, 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 dangerous. But as I said before, if you're mostly in your rational brain, your amygdala will help you to avoid dangerous things, but you're still concentrating on positive things and optimistic things. If there's stress, this part of the brain goes on overtime and worries and worries and worries about things. So the second part of your primitive brain is your hippocampus, and that's the green bit, and that is the sort of emotional memory of you. That's where habits, both good and bad, reside. So I want to explain what your primitive brain does in a bit more detail. It gets you out of danger. Well, I've mentioned depression and anxiety and anger, and I touched on some of the negative workplace traits that come from those things, because everything is on a continuum. And as employers, you are not there to diagnose anybody's mental condition at all. But you can definitely spot if someone's late. You can spot if someone is down in the dumps a lot. You can spot if someone's work is sloppy. They're indicators for you that somebody is not dealing so well with whatever's going on. So how, bearing in mind that everything is on a continuum, what is the purpose of having this response that we've evolved? What's the purpose of depression? Well, it's a survival technique, well, a survival mechanism. So if you think that we're going back to 100 million years ago, and we were ancient apey humany people, and we were wandering about. Basically, that's what we did. We wandered about, we had sex with people, we ate some stuff, we killed some things, and we wandered about a bit more, and then we did some sleeping and wandered about a bit more for a really, really long time. And we needed something very, very powerful to keep us safe, a powerful feeling. So imagine, put yourself in the situation, imagine you are an ancient cave person and you are in your cave and you look out of your cave and there's something really scary out there, or maybe there's loads of snow and there's no food and you can't go out, because if you go out, you've had it, you're toast. So really what you need to do is you need to stay in. Isn't it useful to help you to stay in if you absolutely don't want to go outside? You lose all your energy, you become like a bit blah, like, oh, just stick my blanket over the head and then I'll wait until it gets better outside and then I can go outside again. That's the survival mechanism that feelings of depression give a person. And it really this whole COVID thing really feeds into that scary thing, that you may find that some people who've been working at home absolutely fine do not want to come back to the office, full stop. And it's my understanding that if they feel unsafe, they don't have to. So how do you navigate your way around encouraging somebody who you really need to be back to come back? And that's something that we will look at later. So that's depression, how it keeps you safe. How does anxiety keep you safe? Worrying about things. What if this? What if that? What if? What if? Imagine again that you are an ancient person and you're in a jungle or something, and you are, if you're sitting kicking back with your feet up on a rock, not paying any attention to anything, then something is going to come along and it's going to eat you or bite you or sting you or steal your child or whatever. So you have to be in your mind going, oh, whatever's that big snake I saw yesterday? I wonder if it's still there under that rock. Who's that scary looking chap lurking behind that tree? Where's my child? Where? And keeping tabs on your environment, which brings you back to the purpose of your amygdala, which is there in the background doing that primitive checking to make sure you're okay. But you may find that in modern times, because we are modern and because we have modern concerns, that we worry about the credit card bill falling on the doormat. the really anxious person may be terrified that they're going to get COVID germs from somewhere. And they may find that they wash their hands heaps of times, and then that becomes a problem in and of itself. That's the kind of extreme end of anxiety, is obsessive compulsive disorder, which one of the symptoms that's very common is ultra cleanliness, because there's a terrible fear of germs. So there are people who may be struggling with that in the background, and you might not know, because they might not have told you that these things are difficult for them, but COVID might trigger them off. So it's wise to have a care over those things, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later when we do our discussion. So the third survival technique or survival mechanism is anger. Anger gives humans the strength to fight something off, to defend their territory. If you're feeling threatened, often you'll get angry or you'll shout. If you're feeling stressed or uncertain, your security is maybe threatened, you might find yourself getting really short-tempered with people and snapping and just not being very reasonable. And it's a response to a feeling of kind of insecurity and lack of control. So depression, anxiety, and anger, and all of the things that you can think of negative workplace behaviours, and you're all going to know. You may have people in your minds where you go, oh, do you know what, I reckon so and so, I reckon that they might be in their primitive brain a bit more at the moment, because I bet you're all thinking, or if you're thinking about yourself when you've maybe not handled something in as gracious a way as you might have previously done, that's your primitive brain coming because it thinks that there's something wrong. So that's that part. So an interesting thing about the primitive brain, just because I have been doing some research on the whole everybody's drinking much more, that if you're drinking too much during lockdown, your wine o'clock does actually live in your primitive brain, and your primitive brain is where habits form. And if you think about how wonderfully we've all adapted to these strange times, everybody did adapt really quickly, whether they liked it or not. We are absolute learning mechanisms. We are so good at learning as humans, and we learn things dead quickly, and we learn things that are of use to us to keep us safe very quickly too. So if you've had a tricky day in the office, or a horrible Zoom meeting, or you're just feeling generally, a bit rubbish around the edges, you're not producing serotonin and dopamine. You're producing adrenaline and cortisol. But the brain always seeks to keep itself on a balance. So it will seek to do something to try and redress the balance to an extent. And alcohol can release dopamine in the brain. So if you have a rubbish day at work, and then after work you think, right, I'll have a glass of wine or a gin and tonic or something at 6 o'clock, your brain will go, oh, that's better, right, okay, good stuff. And then tomorrow it will remind you at 10 to 6 perhaps that levels are a bit low. What did you do yesterday that kept you safe? Oh yes, that was the thing we did, and that definitely worked. So your primitive brain is in charge of habits that essentially keep you safe, but it doesn't discriminate between whether you think they're good for you or not. So another way that your primitive brain does keep you safe is when you learn to cross the road. You stop, you look both ways, you don't get run over. Every time you don't get run over, crossing the road in that way is a useful thing that you don't have to think about. So habits are formed, both good ones and bad ones, quite quickly. Only it seems that it's easier somehow to form bad habits than good habits, and I don't know why that is. And if anyone has any ideas on this, then please let me know, because I see hundreds of people who really want to have good habits, but it seems that they have more negative ones instead. So that's the primitive brain. So now I'm going to ask and answer, how do we end up in the primitive brain? Some of the time, a lot of the time, or not at all. So this is where I'm going to ask you to do a little visualization exercise with me. So here is a picture of a lemon, and I'd just like you all just to close your eyes be with me closing your eyes, and I want you to imagine that you're in your kitchen, and I want you to imagine that you have a bowl of lemons in front of you, and they're really, 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 really fresh and juicy lemons, and you've got a chopping board and a knife. And what I'd like you to do is, in your mind, go over to your bowl and select the biggest, juiciest looking lemon, and then cut a wedge out of it. And I want you to smell the lemon in your mind's eye, or in your mind's nose. Smell the lemon, and perhaps when you cut it, you could see all the little droplets of lemon juice. And then I want you to put it in your mouth, and I want you to chomp on the lemon. And see if you've had any physical response in your body from chomping on the lemon in your head. Because even as I was talking about it, and I know what to expect, my mouth was watering a little bit. I was imagining it. And that power of imagination is critical in good mental health, because it means that your brain can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. So every thought that you think turns into anxiety. Every negative thought you think sets off your fight or flight system to a certain extent. And it has to be so, because you need to be able to react to things that you think about. But in terms of setting off your primitive brain to being really negative, it's to do with the perception of what is going on, what you think, as well as what is actually going on, reality, and your brain can't tell the difference. And you'll know this, you'll have experienced this, because if you get nervous about something, you know, you're all business people, you will have all had to do challenging things in your life that you have got nervous about beforehand. The actual thing that's happening hasn't happened when you're thinking about it and being nervous. It's happening in the future. So your body's setting you up somehow in case you need to run away from it. So your people who aren't turning up to things are probably suffering from a bit of very negative thinking about things. So I like to use the metaphor of a stress bucket. So imagine that you have a bucket in you that is the receptacle for all the everyday stresses and strains of life that you can cope with. If your stress bucket is relatively empty most of the time, you will end up spending most of your time in your intellectual mind. You'll be producing serotonin and dopamine, and you will be feeling pretty fine. But your stress bucket can fill up. It can fill up really quickly due to external events like illness, redundancy, bereavement, money worries, real actual stuff. But it can also fill up due to how you think about what is going on in life and outside of life. So you can fill up your stress bucket by negatively ruminating on things that have gone wrong for you in the past. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Oh no, that was a really dumb idea. I feel really embarrassed about such and such and so and so. If you keep going over and over it in your brain, it will fill up your stress bucket. You can fill up your stress bucket by what's actually going on. I am scared of COVID. I am not feeling well. I've had COVID. I feel rubbish. All of that stuff, that can go in there too. But you can also fill up your stress bucket by what you're worrying about in the future. I am worried about returning to work. I'm scared of going on the train. What if I get it? What if I lose my job? What if I lose my home? Then, and everybody dies. Your primitive brain has to view everything from the worst possible scenario, because otherwise you wouldn't take any notice of it. It's your danger warning sign. So if you're in your primitive brain a bit, your thinking's going to be much more negative, and you will fill your stress bucket up more. When your stress bucket is full, that's what sets off your primitive brain into full-time worrying, being a dreadful colleague, being all those things that nobody particularly wants to be. It makes you feel miserable. It makes you not feel like doing anything. It makes you cross. It makes you susceptible to, more negative behaviours in yourself. You don't get on with what you want to do. Someone in their primitive brain is much less likely to get up in the morning and go for a healthy jog. We are all being told, oh, you can keep yourself safe and get ready to go back to work by taking lots of nice exercise and eating healthily. that is not default mode for most people. I have to be honest. It's really hard work, and that comes from a very intellectual place to take those elements of control and to put them into your life. You have to be feeling quite good about things to be able to make those positive things. So when your stress bucket's full, that's when you'll notice that you feel overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, and worried about things. So we can help to sort this out. And I'm not here to give you today to do any therapy on you, but I'm going to explain the mechanism by which you can empty your stress bucket. Or if not, then definitely if you've been sleeping poorly, I can explain why that's happening. And that is my next slide. So it's expected in our biology that we have negative thoughts during the day. There are things that we want to do that we're frustrated that we can't do. You know, maybe someone, my best example of when I noticed this working just after I trained was someone in a big, massive, really, really shiny Range Rover drove past me when I was walking to work in the rain, and it felt like they drove through the puddle on purpose. And I was like, what? I am soaking, I'm running after you, come back here. Right, when I see you again, that's it. And I was so cross, and the person probably didn't even notice. And of course they didn't do it on purpose. And maybe they did, but I don't think they did. You have to hope for the best in people. But when I went home, I was still really mad, and I went to bed and I was like, right, if I ever see that Range Rover again, I'm going to totally give them what for. That's it. And I went to bed and I slept on it, and I woke up in the morning and I didn't think about the Range Rover. But there will have been times when someone has wound you up or something's worrying you. You go to bed, you think about it, you wake up in the morning and it's the first thing that you think about. When you sleep, the person in the Range Rover in my head got emptied out of my stress bucket, because my sleep was obviously good enough to manage it. I was mad, but when I woke up in the morning, it had dissipated. It's like if you imagine what your sleep does to your stress levels. If you do a big scribble on a blackboard and then wipe it off, that's what your sleep does for you. So it resets you and it rebalances you so that you can get up in the morning, face the day, and get on with what you have to do. The type of sleep that empties your stress bucket is your dreaming sleep, called rapid eye movement sleep, or REM, and that accounts for 25% of your sleeping cycle. The other 75% approximately of your sleeping cycle is slow wave sleep, and slow wave sleep nourishes you physically. And this is a really back of the envelope explanation of sleep, because it is really, really, really much more complicated than this. But in essence, what you need to know for your purposes is slow wave sleep sorts you out physically, fights off the cold that you might be developing, rests your muscles, your bones, and sorts everything out. And your rapid eye movement sleep, or your dreaming, deals with emotional stress, just dissipating it. It also helps you to lay down memories and to lay down new things that you've learnt. It's a very, mammals can't exist without REM sleep. There's been studies where people have been deprived of REM sleep, not the most ethical studies, but people have died when they were trying to eliminate REM sleep. So it's thought also that it's to do with temperature regulation in mammals and all sorts of other things, but it deals with your stress. It's also a really, really exhausting type of sleep. You use up more energy when you're sleeping doing REM than you do when you're awake. So when I go to sleep and have a little dream tonight, I'll be using up more energy than I am using talking to you here and thinking about what I'm doing and being conscious. So it's very tiring. And people can fall into two categories of sleep trouble generally. And the first is that people tend to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So my brainy business idea is to set up paid for club where people who are awake at 4 in the morning can all chat to each other, because everybody, it's 4 o'clock or 4:30, loads of people are awake, and it just seems to be that that's the magic hour of wakefulness. And the reason why that happens is because your brain goes to sleep, and somehow when it's sorting things out, it goes, all right, then what have we got to do here tonight? Ooh, there's a lot in the stress bucket. Right, we'll do that first. So it gives you REM sleep first when you fall asleep. And then after you've done 25% of your total, which is all the energy you can expend on that mental health housekeeping task, you wake up and your thoughts are all over the place because you've been dealing with the stress. So if you wake up at 4 in the morning, generally, you might have washing machine brain, and you'll find it very difficult to get back to sleep because you've been using up so much energy. You're actually really alert. So that's one way that sleep can be disrupted. And if your employees mention they've not been sleeping well, it's probably a bucket sort of situation. The second way that sleep can be very disturbed is if a person is sleeping too much. If a person is tired and feeling depressed and low in mood, they may well go to sleep. Every time they go to sleep in their personal system, they will have some more REM sleep. So they're not wakers, they're carrying on. They'll wake up and go, I'm exhausted, I'm just going to go and have a nap. I'm not getting up yet, I'm just going to have another snooze. Then you have some more dreaming, more REM. And the person gets gradually tireder and tireder, which means that then they don't have any energy to do anything. So there's no positive reinforcement for life. You know, if you're too tired to go to work because you feel really miserable, you're not going to get the feedback of having achieved something that will perk you up. So what we have to do to help people, as you guys being employers, and also for those self-employed people sitting here, you are in charge of your own motivation, and that can be really, really tough. You know, I know this from personal experience. So what you can do for yourselves and for the people around you is to help them put less stuff in their bucket. So bringing it all back round full circle, your brain can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. So when you're talking to people, if you focus on a problem, tell me what's wrong, you'll be able to reel off a whole list of things that are wrong. The person who is telling you the list of things that is going wrong is reinforcing the wrongness in their brain. When we started today, I asked you to tell me what's gone well. That's a particularly hypnotherapist thing to do. You sit in the room and the person's just met you, and you go, so tell me what's gone well. And I can see people's heads virtually breaking because they're going, well, but I'm here because I've got all these problems, and you want to know what's going well. The reason for that is if I ask you what's going well, you're now thinking in your intellectual mind. If I ask you what's going wrong, you are thinking in your primitive brain and you're filling up your bucket. So that's not really very helpful from a therapeutic point of view, but you as employers can learn how to change your language around subtly to get your people thinking more in their intellectual mind a bit about work and about their future. And maybe that's all you can do. If someone's really struggling, then you must signpost them to get some help from somewhere. But I will also say, I don't know what it's like, you know, in Northern Ireland and Ireland, but here in England, certainly, if you go to your options are you go to your GP to get something, you will get prescribed antidepressants, or you'll be offered talking therapies, which last time I checked had about a 6-month waiting list, which is not very helpful. So it may or may not be up to you to go, do you know what, actually I think you could do with some help. But there are lots of nice people out there who can help, but your options for somebody going to their GP are kind of minimal. So all you can really do is to help your workplace environment to be as positive and optimistic as possible, which is going to be, you know, a bit of a challenge because it's all going to look different when people return. So I'm going to go on to part 2. Sorry.
Can I interrupt a second? Can I take a quick vote on whether or not people think we need a short break before we go on to our group discussion?
Comfort break?
Comfort break, anybody? I don't want to lose anybody, but if you would like to jump off before we go into our open discussion, it would be, now's your time. And then Miranda, perhaps you could tell us while people are jumping out and about, what we're going to go on to do next. So what time is it now? It's just before 5, and so if we break at 5 for literally 3 or 4 minutes, that would be great.
Super. Right, well, so the next part 2, is I have outlined 3 case studies that might well be of relevance. I've thought up some solutions, which after you've all discussed them a bit, I will tell you what I think, and you may or may not agree or whatever, but it's a discussion. So that's that part. And then right at the end, I will give you some helpful questions to ask your staff to help them get their minds in a more positive framework if they're feeling down in the dumps, gloomy or anxious.
That's wonderful, Miranda. So everybody, just before 5, if we could meet back here at just 3 minutes past 5, make a run for it if you need to. Thanks so much.
Great. See you at 3 minutes past 5.
You're not allowed to go anywhere, Miranda.
Am I not allowed to go anywhere? Oh, all right then.
Now we've got you, we can have a quick chat around.
Oh, yeah, do ask. Yeah, and if anyone's got any questions, this is a.
So it might be good, Aoife, if we could unmute everybody. But there is one, Trisha. I don't know if you're on, if you're available to chat. But Trisha had a really interesting insight, which I thought was good, which is that she's become a better leader by not being able to see people. And actually, Trisha, I would agree with you on that one, because sometimes when you have difficult conversations and you're looking at somebody, it can be quite tricky. Aoife, if you'd like to come in, or Trisha, if you'd like to come in to talk about that, are you available?
Hope you're well, keeping safe and healthy. If I can help anything, give me a call. If not, take care and we'll chat soon. Thanks, Alison.
Don't know what's happening there. I think somebody's unmuted, but I don't think Trisha's around. But could you maybe perhaps talk about that, Miranda, why you think that's easier to sometimes manage people if you can't see them, particularly if you're having a difficult conversation?
Well, it could be because the person's not in the room. Oh, well, they're not in the room, so they're out of. If they get upset, you can just turn them off, can't you? Like in the most basic way, you can switch someone off now. You don't, and they're in their place in their room. You're in your room, but there's a lot of energy that comes from difficult conversations, your own and other people's. So. Yeah, I can see that having one level of remove is easier.
Okay, that's
difficult
good.
things. I mean, does that make sense, or am I just giving you a really clear answer?
No, that does. And the other one was from Caroline, actually, and she talked about contagious negativity, and how you deal with that. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yes, we feed off of other people's emotions, and I think culturally, oh, am I still here, or are you still there? Yes, I think culturally we have a very, in Britain certainly, we are a very negative society generally. So I think yes, you get contagious negativity, but if you go and stand at a bus stop with a load of strangers, certainly I know definitely in Bristol, you can stand at a bus stop with a complete stranger and they will start moaning at you about something. It's a real thing. And I don't know, and that just made me always think that our culture is quite negative. And I was having a meeting with one of our students for Montessori the other day, and I said, oh, so how are you getting on? How are you getting on with your tutor? And she said, oh, she's really brilliant, really answering, whenever I need help, so I can't complain really. It's like, why even say so I can't complain really? It means you were thinking about complaining. That's just in the background of your subconscious, is that people are quite negative in how they talk. So to stop contagious negativity, you can actually call people out a bit and say, wow, you must have a really good reason for being this negative. Can you tell me what it is? Or
okay, that's
do we need to be, do we need to be that negative?
Yeah.
You are allowed to call people out on it if they're bringing you down or, causing doom, because you don't want to.
Okay. That's really helpful. Thanks so much. If anybody else would like to add to the chat section, if there's anything that they would like to ask Miranda, then I can help them facilitate that. I think we probably can start with the next stage now, Miranda, if that's okay with you.
Okay, so right, so how to get your thinking and your people to a more serotonin and dopamine creating sort of situation. You create your own serotonin and your dopamine in your brain by what you do and how you think, remembering that your brain can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. So if you think about something going well in the future, you'll produce serotonin and dopamine. It makes you more likely to do something if you think that it's going to go well. You're much less likely to do something if you think that it's going to go badly. So what you need to do for all things is to see if you can get most of your interactions to have a positive thought, a positive action, or a thought of a positive action, and positive interaction with other people. The interaction part has been really hard for people during COVID and lockdown. And yes, we've all done Zoom, and we may have had drinks with people on Zoom, and it's amazing how you can have, virtual cocktails with family and friends, far over the globe. So we have had interaction, but that human contact, being able to hug someone, being physically close to people, there are so many things that we pick up that we're not aware of, that when we are just on a screen, that we miss. And going back to the person who was saying that she was a better lead doing difficult conversations, it might be because she's not picking up the upset signals from the person she's having the difficult conversation with. All those subtle human cues that we, body language and whatnot. If you're a face on a screen, there are things that we miss. So to create your own serotonin and dopamine, you need positive thoughts, positive actions, and positive interaction with other people as best that you can. So I want to just go on to 3 case studies, and I'm going to open this up to, as I said, to everyone else to have a think about. So your first case study is your person who is frightened of returning to work in case they catch COVID at the office. The what if I touch a pen and get COVID person. And Judith and Bridget and I discussed this person does exist in somewhere. So I wonder, maybe Judith, because we started off with this person, you and I and Bridget, have you had any more thoughts about how you might handle that person?
Bridget, have you got anything to add in here? Because this was your person.
Yeah, it was. Hi, everybody, and loving this discussion so far. It's explaining a lot to me about my behaviour and my brain. But the bit that I suppose I thought of in relation to that kind of anxiety, where somebody is going back into the workplace or into any place, to be honest, and they start panicking over, what if I touch this, or somebody handles my stapler, or if I make a cup of coffee and switch the kettle on. To me, that's maybe about the controllables and uncontrollables. And there's got to be something about how people can kind of focus on what they can control. So they can carry hand sanitizing gel, they can keep themselves clean, they can wipe a pen, they can, and trying to turn the volume down on the things that are uncontrollable, because you can't control everybody else's behavior, but maybe you can control yours. So I don't know, maybe there's something in that space that would help in that scenario.
That's good. Has anybody got anything to add to that before we jump into Miranda to see how she would manage that? If you'd like to put your hand up, that's probably the best way. And if you could keep an eye out as well, so I'm not missing anybody, that would be good. Okay, Miranda, I think it's just over to you, really.
Okay, so over to me. Well, I had a big think about this, because when we were discussing this, Bridget and Judith and I, we went, we'll just get that person to wash all the pens then, won't we, Which, on the face of it, seems like quite a good idea. It's like, this is obviously your area of concern. You can be in charge of it. And then I gave it some more thought, and I think that that would be a terrible idea and very unfair to that poor person who's obviously really anxious. So why give them the responsibility of dealing with everybody else's, you know, not, as Bridget said, people should be responsible for their own, you know, health and safety, because we all have to do it. It's not any one person's responsibility. And I really like the idea of lowering the volume of it. So I came up with some actual practical suggestions that might work. Suggestion number one is that before everybody does go back to work, you could have a meeting about, given the fact that you all have ground rules of what you have to and have to not do, and they're official, you could say something like, okay, I'd be really interested to see from you all, what's your most interesting idea that we can do over and above to keep everybody extra safe and secure at work? Not your best idea, but your most interesting one. Because as far as I worked it out when I was thinking about what's your most interesting idea, you've got the person in their intellectual mind, but you're giving them space to be really creative. If you say, give me your best idea, then that person has to censor their thoughts somewhat. So your most interesting idea opens it up, and it might be fun. People might come out with some really left field ideas that kind of make it more enjoyable. So you could try that, and then everybody is involved in the decisions of how to do the extra. You could.
Yeah, that's really good, Miranda. I think I really like the idea about interesting idea. That makes a big difference, actually. Yeah, I think that's really strong. Has anybody anything that they'd like to add to that before we move to the next case study? Bridget, do you think that would work with that person you've got in your mind?
Yeah, no, I think that would, and I think actually what that's making me think of as well is it's partly that thing of just engaging in the dialogue without feeding the fear. So you're not asking them to tell you more about the fear and maybe have that grow in their mind, but you're actually asking them to come up with something, you know, interesting and a bit different, and that might just stimulate the brain to go in different directions. So yeah, I like that.
That was kind of what I was hoping for. And just a couple of other real quick things. I know that having been to Julie's office, that you do have a pretty clear desk policy. It looked like it was all very nice and tidy, but I think that from a practical point of view, a clear desk policy is probably a really good idea. My third idea was that make sure everybody has one of everything, because hole punches, staplers, they're always getting lost. So if you color coded everybody, so that person A's area, maybe they've got like pink stickers on their stuff, and person B maybe has blue stickers, and have your coffee mugs in the same thing, so that everyone has their own stuff, and that it's easy to see if it's out of place, and that might make people feel more comfortable. And spend 5 minutes at the beginning of work and at the end of whoever's in, sanitize your area. And if everybody does it together, that might kind of build a bit of a bond where maybe the water cooler moments are missing because you can't like go off and have a little chat. But if everyone's in doing the same task, that might foster a bit kind of more communication.
Right, that's a brilliant idea. There's always somebody stealing my stapler, so that will really help to identify who that person is. So I think
yeah, well, you'll know, won't you?
Thanks for that. So shall we go on to the next?
Yes, next one.
Sorry, I think Heidi's trying to come into the conversation.
Oh, sorry, Heidi.
Sorry.
Hi, could we have a chat?
Hi, Heidi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just thought what's interesting was, I'm sorry, I can't remember the lady's name, said about asking people what they can control. I think it's also possibly an idea within your group of people, like Miranda said, is to ask them what would make them feel safe and comfortable. Because we all know for ourselves, don't we, what we would like. And so especially the interesting idea, but I hand it back a bit for other people to take some sort of responsibility and ideas in terms of what they would like. Because we can all think about what other people should and shouldn't do, and therefore it should be okay. But actually, we don't actually know what would make someone else feel comfortable. So to actually put it out there, to ask the question, and in the way that Miranda said is a really nice way to do it. And it also springs to mind the interesting concept. There's a guy called Mark McAlgo who he does the sort of work that Miranda and I do, and he put across, he was working with this Italian company, an industrial company, and they wouldn't wear the industrial safety glasses. And no matter what they did in trying to force the rules upon them, these Italian suave guys who like thought that they were a bit of God's gift didn't want to look that ugly. So they came to a different solution and they redesigned the glasses to look like sunglasses, really trendy glasses, and then the guys wore them. So they sort of approached it in a non-problematic way, and also by asking the people what they want is actually quite big, and buys into the what would make you feel comfortable. You know, asking the staff what would make them feel comfortable, because we won't always think about what's bothering other people. We just see it from our own point of view. So to ask the question, I think is a really good idea, and in particular in the way Miranda said it, the interesting bit is good to take them out of the normal, which goes back to the sunglasses. You know, there's various different ways we can make it more interesting, more creative. So
that's great, Heidi. Thank you so much for that. Great. Miranda, would you like to go on to the next case study, please?
Okay.
Conscious of time.
So
launch the next poll.
yeah, actually, I forgot about that one. Getting so carried away. Yeah, poll 4, please.
It's relating to the next case study, so yeah.
So yes, this is the them and us scenario question. Well, they're both the next two are both them and us scenarios. So your person who's worried about returning after furlough, maybe they were furloughed because they weren't coping particularly well working from home. Maybe they were furloughed because that was the option that was available to keep their job, whatever. But that person who's been at home getting paid 80% but not actually doing any work might actually feel quite guilty about that if everybody else has been at work. They might not feel very comfortable going back to work, worrying about what people think of them. So I wonder if anyone, because I'm guessing that people are expecting people in this situation to be returning to your businesses. So have you had any thoughts about how you might tackle that person?
Could I ask Eugene maybe to talk about this, please?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a very difficult balance, because we have some people who've been furloughed and the 3 or 4 weeks have just disappeared because they've been off doing cycle training and have very much enjoyed the patch, but they're keen to come back to work, and some of them have come back. And then we also have people who have been working away, doing deadlines, working at home, trying to balance children, and because of the nature of the projects, they haven't been furloughed. And I think they're feeling a bit worn out and could do with a couple of weeks on furlough. And I'm nervous about what the impact is when all those people end up sort of back in together and talk about their sort of COVID home working experience. And how do we get a balanced situation? Because I think the ones who have been working very hard, why do people take holiday at this time when there's nothing really to do on holiday? And is there a way to sort of make them feel better about the fact they've had to work?
That's good. Can I pick up with Patrick as well? Because I know you've got something to add before handing back to Miranda.
Yeah, exact same situation for me, Eugene, except that some of my team we've been paying 100% to. So I've got people who are working their backsides off and getting paid, and I've got people who are sitting at home doing nothing and getting paid the exact same. And I've had some reluctance to bringing some people back from furlough. Oh, you're interrupting my holidays, this kind of thing. And I see a lot of tension occurring there. And it's how do I explain that we brought back the best utility players, people who could do a bit of everything. You're more of a specialist in what you do. We could cope without the specialism, but everyone's valuable. I'm looking for inspiration here, please.
That's good, Miranda. Inspiration.
But I like what you that you have put a positive spin on it. It's like you are special. You did just get to spend 3 months off. You're very special, but that's a really positive twist on a very reasonable business decision, isn't it? You looked at what you needed and who provided what you needed. So I think we're actually coming to question 3 really with both of your examples, Patrick and Eugene. And when I was thinking about how you might answer this, this question, I think that your person who has been working through, obviously you're going to say thank you to them, but they're probably a bit knackered now. Like you said, people are a bit worn out. So given the options that are available to you in your particular company situations, if you can afford to give someone a bonus, I'd give them a bonus a bit on the quiet. But if that's not available to you, I'd offer the person a choice of, would you like to go on furlough for a couple of weeks, or would you like extra leave, when things are back to normal? Give a choice of 2 things that you can offer to recognise that they've held everything steady while other people have been going off nice bike rides and, walks in the countryside. So it's what you can offer to those people who've kept it all going, because they will be the people who will get burnt out in the fullness of time and be annoyed, resentful that they haven't been specially patted on the back a bit, because they've performed, they've kept you going, they've performed a service for you, which without them, where would you be?
That's good.
So,
could we ask if anybody else has got any other ideas? The thing about furlough is, obviously, if they've not been on furlough before, you cannot now put them on furlough.
you're not, so that's not an option, righty ho.
So
not an option.
I think what Patrick and Eugene are looking for is, how do you get your team back to be a team when there's been 2 tiers, essentially, those who've worked and those who haven't, and how do they mesh again? Whether some who've been on furlough think that it's a waiting room to redundancy, as Eugene had put it, or is it the ones that have been there are feeling exhausted and haven't had some time off? So I think, yeah, absolutely, there's practical things like bonuses and holidays, but how do you manage the comms internally when you get them, when you're faced with them all in front of you for the first day back? How do you kind of reset the team?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that, because it depends on who you've got on your team, what your work culture is like. How many people do you have? How straightforward can you be with people? There's ways and means. I suppose maybe this would take us, while I think about if I can come up with a good answer for you to take away from that. There are, and my last slides may illuminate a bit on this question. Here are some quite solution focused questions for dealing with people who are miserable, but on the depressed end of things, and remembering that these questions are always trying to get you to be thinking in your intellectual mind about what you can do, what are you hopeful for. So I was thinking, in relation to answering that question that you just asked, what are all your best hopes on returning to work? That gets you thinking about why you like your job. It gets you hopeful that you can do your job going forwards. You can develop that into, what are your best hopes for seeing your colleagues again? What do you like most about work? How are you going to pay your colleagues who have been working really hard? How are you going to compliment them on what they've done? How are you, as their colleagues, going to recognise, make them feel valued? So there's lots of places that you can go with some of these questions that could flip the dialogue into being a more positive, have a more positive feeling about it.
Yeah, I can see how that works really well, particularly on the first question for the people that have been retained at work. So what if they managed, what are they most proud of their time working during furlough, is a really good thing to do. So we can kind of get some real feelings from them. Has anybody got anything else that they'd like to add to that? Because I think those questions are really great, actually.
Caroline, were you wanting to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we have a weekly call with everybody who's furloughed and unfurloughed. So we continue with our weekly status meetings so that those who are furloughed still know what's going on in the business, and even though their clients are perhaps been looked after by somebody else, they're still connected in with the business. And some of the team are saying, oh, to members who are not furloughed, they said, thank you so much for looking at, oh, you're a star, thank you so much. And the person who's working says, well, I'm just doing my job. So, I'm actually not, why are you giving me special praise? I'm actually just doing my job. It's everybody else who's potentially suffering. So maybe the person I've chosen to kind of stay course business is the most resilient.
Yeah.
And therefore that's exactly the response I would have expected from her. She's not jealous at all of the people who are on furlough leave. So I have probably engineered that.
I think that's really good, Caroline. And I think this last slide now, Miranda, is really good in terms of talk us through these 3 points here.
Again, all these questions are to get a person in that positive intellectual way. And they are so adaptable to say, what are you able to do to help? It's assuming that person totally can help. So it's assuming that they've got a talent, a capacity, space. You're assuming the best of that person by even saying the question. All of them, I think most of my questions generally have an implied compliment somewhere in them. So you're kind of boosting someone up and you're saying, I assume you can help. What are you going to do to help? So you're kind of subtly ordering them that they are going to do some helping, but they can help because they can. So
that's a really good one. So you could be saying, Jack has been working full time during out this time. He's a bit exhausted. What do you think now that you're coming back into the business that you can do to help? Is a really good way of using that first one.
Yeah.
Lisa, did you want to come in there?
I just basically wanted to say the same.
Oh, can't hear you.
I think you're breaking up a wee bit.
Oh, hello?
Yeah, you're back now.
I think, basically what Judith and Caroline said, I think you shouldn't underestimate the power of praise.
Yeah.
I do a lot of work with volunteers and a lot of stuff starting my business, and praise is a really big thing. Even if you're not getting paid, praise is a very positive thing. And I think it's really important, communication and getting people together, and the weekly meetings, I think, Caroline, have been, really good idea. Then there isn't that day one of like, and I don't know if anyone isn't doing it yet, but I don't think it's too late to maybe start those meetings. Even if it feels a bit late, it might be a good idea to break to go back bit by bit by organising those kind of meetings. And this positive language is fantastic, Miranda.
This is my last slide with some questions for the more angry member of the team. Again, really trying to elicit what people are good at. What is the most important quality you should remember that you have when you're under pressure? Because you forgot how good you were at such. But I'm just reminding you that you're good at that, but you just tell me what it is. I'm not going to tell you what you're good at. You tell me. It makes people take responsibility for remembering that they're good at what they do. Especially when, maybe when you're stressed, you forget that you're good at what you do because it's all a bit much. You said that you'd like to see less of such and such. What would you like to see more of? And this is my favourite solution-focused question, because you must have a really important reason for such and such. Please tell me what it is, which you can use for any situation. It's a use-all situation. You must have a really important reason for not stacking the dishwasher properly. Can you tell me what it is? It just helps, and you can use it for anything. So that's what I want to end on. My really positive solution-focused question. That's my gift to you all today, is the multi-purpose question. So thank you so much for listening to me talk, and I hope it's been useful.
I'm not letting you off the hook yet.
Oh, okay, right.
I've just got one question, and then, because I know people might need to go. Somebody has posed a question, which is, you know, some of us are employers here, and it's been a really tough time. We've had to make difficult decisions. How do you think it would sit from a sort of from your experience, if we were to talk about how difficult that it has been for the employer and some of those decisions we've had to make? Do you think that would elicit empathy, or do you think that's a bit of a dangerous place to go?
I suppose it depends on what you want out of everybody knowing how difficult it is. But I think that generally people respond to facts, and it has been difficult. And you know, some people are thriving during this time, but most people, I think, are worried, and it's stressful. And I think that it's completely fine to be realistic, because people will be worrying to some extent. You know, if this company's looking like it's a bit wobbly, do I stay or do I go? It's again down to what your company culture is.
Yeah.
You know, is it going to make everybody look for other jobs, and then you're really stuffed? But I think you're completely fine to say it has been tough. We are getting through it. This is how we plan on getting through it. This is what we hope that, you know, you're going to be able to contribute to get us out of the difficult situation.
That's great.
Miranda, can I just jump in there?
Yes, of course.
I mean, I completely agree with what you said, and I think that it's striking this balance between giving people factual information, explaining the situation, letting them try and understand. I find you have to be so careful about the words you use and the way in which you say it, because sometimes in these conversations people don't quite hear what you've said. Now maybe that's that's part of the mistake that I've made, but it just when you've thought it through properly, it seems to be quite effective. But there is a risk strategy there, and it can go a bit pear-shaped.
So were you saying basically, if you're going to have this sort of conversation with your employees, that you have to sit down and perhaps write it down for yourself first, what you are going to say, and think about the implications of how you've said it?
Yes,
to them.
To a certain extent from each person's perspective. So we had, like Caroline, we have our sort of weekly MS Teams, which includes the people who are furloughed and not furloughed. But that was the one where I had to say, well, we've got to furlough more people before the 10th. And those people were busy doing things. And so they were sort of, oh, you just cut us out. And then the people who knew then they were not going to get furloughed.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was real mixed messages coming in there. But anyway, I haven't had too much.
Yeah, I know it's been a really difficult time because things changed. It was so quick, and everything has changed. So, and is changing. And fair play to you all who do manage teams of staff for being, all that thinking and that flexible thinking that you've had to do, and remain optimistic, and pay all your bills, and all that stuff that you've had to do. So I praise you too.
Thank you. That's what we're looking for. Looking for that positivity. Okay, well, I'm just really conscious that it's 5:30. I'm going to close the meeting with a quick slide just talking about up and coming events. But Miranda, are you okay just to hold fire for a few minutes?
Sure.
So that if anybody's got any particular question, we can open it to the floor. So just a number of events that are coming up over the next couple of months, which is communicating and marketing your way out of COVID. I'm going to take that session along with Caroline McGrath from the Media Shop, and that's looking at what are the opportunities, and when things start to open up, how are you going to make sure that you get your voice and brand heard. The next one is the best is yet to come, and it's about bounce forward, and that's about let's not go back to what we had, let's keep some of the good things that we've captured here in our chat button, and how do we take those and move forward. So that's the bounce forward piece. And then we're going to look at young professionals. If you've got people in your organisation who are young, we love to have them as part of our young professional career development session. We had a very, very successful Growing Our Cities in the Climate Emergency event, which was in association with Jacobs. That was a fascinating event, and we're going to look at that again. Our virtual networking event it works really well actually, and it's a bit of a laugh, and you get lots of Irish accents. There seem to be a lot of Northern Irish on this call today, but you get some Southern ones as well, can I just say, from the Cork girl. And then we have our virtual awards coming up in October. Some of you will have been to our amazing awards that we've had in the past, at the Edinburgh City Chambers and Glasgow and Kelvin Grove Gallery. We're going to now have it virtually for this year before we go back to a very glittering event for 2000 and next year, whenever that is. So thank you very much indeed. Again, Miranda, really appreciate it. For everybody who needs to go, please go, and thank you very much for joining us. We'd love to get your feedback on this session. And anybody, if you've got a particular question for Miranda, we're going to unmute you now. Please feel free to jump in and speak to her. So Miranda, thanks very much. And anybody, if you would like to speak to Miranda about what support she can give your staff and your company, please feel free to do so. We'll be sharing her contact details at the end. Stay safe, everyone, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Right, has anybody got anything that they'd like to ask particularly? Caroline?
This isn't a question. Oh, Andrew's gone. I was going to tell Andrew how I addressed that issue of having everyone in the room on Zoom and making an announcement and everyone's not hearing
I think that was Eugene actually.
Oh, Eugene was it?
Don't worry, that's fine.
Well, my suggestion is to talk to everybody offline.
Yeah.
And therefore, at the point that you're actually announcing it formally, not everybody knows that you've spoken to them all individually, but you have, and therefore there's no surprises.
No, I think that's really good. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else who'd like to ask something? Carol.
Hi, I'd just like to share something in terms of getting people chatting, something that I use from training that I've done with Nancy Klein work, and that is to ask people what their freshest thoughts are, and then you get sort of unfiltered thoughts and just whatever's in the person's head at the moment. So we find that quite good at meetings, and particularly in starting a meeting as well, or when presenting something that might not be popular, but you want to hear what people think anyway. So freshest thoughts is what
I like the idea of freshest thoughts though, because it sounds nice, doesn't it? It's got it's got a positive sort of feel to it, doesn't it? Freshest thoughts, not your old. Well, I don't want to hear your old mouldy old thoughts that you've had before. I want you best shiny ones.
Yeah, mouldy thoughts not required. Absolutely. Okay, that's been really helpful. Anybody else? Brenda, we've not heard from you today. Have you got anything to add?
Sorry, you're on mute there. I've just unmuted you, Brenda.
Sorry, am I unmuted now?
Yeah, you're fine now.
I'm in a slightly unusual situation that we all had to be away from the practice. I'm an optometrist, a bit like dentists. We don't even know yet when we're going back. And some of my staff definitely have settled into being very comfortably furloughed, and some of them will be quite nervous coming back. And I found it really helpful, that advice just about how to deal with the most nervous. And I think that idea of saying to them, would you like to come in and show us how you would like things set up? We've already put lots in place, but I think that's a great idea to give them some of the control. And because things are changing so quickly, I think we need to avoid everybody sitting around talking about COVID all the time, because there's so much happening and so much misinformation in that. So it is that bit about, you know, let's not talk about the C word in this meeting, but, you know, what's your up-to-date feeling now about going back or possibly going back? So I think that's a lovely idea, the freshest idea, and it will be changing all the time. But no, as I say, we're not even there yet. So it's great to be learning from you guys. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Good. Well, unless anybody else has got anything to ask, I think we'll go and have that gin and tonic that Miranda would be really good.
What time is it?
No time yet.
My head's already telling me. Clearly my dinner clock's earlier than most people's. Thank you so much indeed. That's been great, Angela. And we look forward, if everybody could fill in the poll and just give us some feedback. We're learning as we go along. That would be extremely helpful. Thank you so much.
Great.
Stay safe.
Okay, that was lovely. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Enjoy your gin.